Okay, do you want to tell us your name and what's been going on around here?
I'm John Wright. I am the director of the Thomas Paine Cottage. And you're interested in what is happening between the Thomas Paine Cottage. I shouldn't say between the Thomas Paine Cottage and the Thomas Paine National Historical Association, but the museum that used to be operated across the street, you noticed, is closed. And frankly, it has been closed for the last 9 years. The organization used it for their headquarters, and the president of the association lived in the apartment with his family in the building, and he was using it, in my opinion, as a private residence. The museum was not open to the public, or very, very rarely open to the public. It had ridiculous hours to begin with, like Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays from 2 to 5, and he didn't maintain those. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens, and probably more like hundreds of people, certainly over the years, who came down the hill dissatisfied that the museum was closed and asking me, why is it closed, as if we had something to do with it, because people confuse the Thomas Paine Cottage and the Thomas Paine Museum as being one entity.
Why don't you give us a little bit of the background of both organizations?
Our organization, which is a private organization, was founded in 1886. It was starting out as the Historical Association of the City of New Rochelle. It had various names of the Historical Association. More generally, it was known as the Huguenot or Huguenot and New Rochelle Historical Association. And it always, or as of 1908, used this building, the Thomas Paine Cottage, as its headquarters. The building, the cottage, was moved to this location in 1908 from its original location about 4 blocks from here. It's still on the Thomas Paine farm, and it was officially opened as a historic house museum in 1910. In 1925, the Thomas Paine National Historical Association moved their headquarters and their collection from New York City to just across the street to a brick semi-fireproof building. And the two organizations not coexisted, but operated together. Not per se as the same organization, but as a brother and sister organization, to the degree that the Thomas Paine Cottage artifacts for Thomas Paine materials, the city of New Rochelle, early history of New Rochelle, and the Huguenot settlers documentation and articles and artifacts were all sent across the street for safekeeping in the semi-fireproof building. Unfortunately, when the two organizations actually did become co-joined, their boards did not work well together. Now, this is, of course, one-sided, but it's the side that was told to me. It's simply, if this operation operates in the black, well, they more often or not were operating in the red, and they were always trying to dip into this organization's funds for them to operate whatever they were doing. There were personality problems also, and many of my board members used to be board members there until they were thrown off once they started objecting to the way that artifacts were being maintained. And ultimately it came to a head about 12 years ago when New York State Museum stepped in and separated the two organizations, giving us specific instructions how to go about to become chartered museums in New York State. The Thomas Paine Cottage became a chartered museum. the Thomas Paine Museum across the street never did. They were a incorporated not-for-profit, just as we are too, a 501c3. But they never became chartered. And because of that, they were not under the auspices of New York State Museums. In 2005, it was discovered that they sold off 11 Thomas Paine artifacts, letters, documents, first issues, to a private collector for $289,000. Ostensibly, it was to maintain their building. Law in New York State museums forbids such a sale. And it drew the attention of New York State museums and ultimately the Attorney General's office, who only a few months ago has finally come down with an edict. The Thomas Paine National Historical Association are not competent to keep a museum, to keep a collection, to keep the building, or to keep a library. And the association's holdings and collection are in the process of being dispersed to an appropriate historical association that can archivally store it. We were told, though not officially, I was in the mayor's office of New Rochelle, that with this seizure, some of the artifacts that you were looking at here in the cottage would be seized also. That would be ripping the jewel out of our crown. We are a destination for nearly 4,000 to 5,000 people a year for pilgrimage to see Thomas Paine Cottage. And we obviously object to that. With that, I started researching our executive minutes for meetings that go back to as early as 1910. And I have discovered, actually, that the two historical associations were joined and that our collection was given to them for safekeeping. So we are obviously now going to make the claim whatever is left of the collection in the museum across the street belongs to us, so that at least part of it can be put on display here at the cottage, and the rest of it archivally stored and rested and on a regular rotation be displayed here at the cottage in the future.
Is there anywhere people can find out more information about this or get in?
You would have to contact me. I don't believe any of this is in the news anymore. In 2005, it made all the local papers, including the New York Times, but unfortunately, while the information was correct, it was misleading. For example, the New York Times, with the large article that they wrote, put a 3-column color photograph of the cottage on the front page of the article, and so thereby made the incorrect association that we had something to do with selling the artifacts. And it's in fact something that we are still dealing with from time to time. People mistakenly think that we were the ones who sold the artifacts. I mean, it really gets ridiculous. A year and a half ago, I was up to my waist fly fishing in a trout stream, and the guy downstream asks what I do for a living, and I get a response that, "How dare you sell Thomas Paine artifacts?" So even in my leisure, I can't get away from the situation. But I hope that we're going to be able to finally come to a good resolution. Is we should be the stewards of the Thomas Paine artifacts and have a portion of them always on display here in the cottage, so that people from around the country and around the world who come to visit us to see what's left of Thomas Paine's physical legacy have something to see.
Thank you.
My pleasure.